Metroid Dread has some extremely fun bosses and enemies, and today, I think it's time to look at all the bosses in the game, since most people have already completed it. And I've also must give, of course, a spoiler warning, because today we are looking at every single boss in Metroid Dread. Well, almost every single one. We'll be comparing all the EMMIs, all the bosses, and one type of the mini-bosses that appear. For instance, if there's multiple different Chozo soldiers, we'll only choose one of them to rank, instead of all of them, which would just be pointless. So we will be ranking all the bosses of Metroid Dread, going from 18 to number 1. So if you want to put your predictions down below of who the top 5 would be, go ahead and do so. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. You guys have been showing so much support for the channel in the last couple of weeks. I cannot thank you guys enough. And if you want to show support on this video as well, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to stay up to date on all things Metroid and Nintendo in general. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and let's get on to the list. Of course, we have the first EMMI in our 18th slot. It's already beaten up and kind of destroyed, and his faceplate is already gone, meaning all Samus has to do is some quick dodges, which are explained to you, so you really don't have to execute them, because they give it to you, and you have to get past it, find the central unit, and blast him in his face, and he's dead. The hallways aren't that long, and the sections are not that big for this EMMI, and it's really just a beginning, teaching you how to play the game and how to defeat these EMMI. It's a very interesting first boss encounter, because it's kind of scary the way this thing's chasing you like broken limbs and sparking and ready to blow up. It's weird. It never really explains how this thing became so damaged, but it is an interesting first boss encounter. In order for Samus to get the Omega Cannon, she had to take out the central units in each EMMI section, and these were like mini mother brains to me. How they shot the little red rings at you that you couldn't break, and the different lasers from the wall as you went back and forth, trying to defeat the central unit, eventually seeing its brain and its eyeball. It's kind of the AI unit and what controls everything within the EMMI zones. If you take these out, you get your Omega Cannon. And these were not super crazy, and they didn't really increase in difficulty with the different ones, which I thought they would, with more lasers and rings flying around the room, but it was actually a pretty decent fight to fight these things, because it was just kind of cool. It kind of gave me the remembrance of Mother Brain and how you had to dodge all these different rings and items in the room in order to defeat the boss. It wasn't too bad, but definitely not the greatest boss in the game. The second EMMI you encounter is a full-blown EMMI chase down. It's a real EMMI that's in mint condition, and it's trying to hunt you down fast. And this is like the first time you get that fast-paced feeling of something following you. Of course, it gives you a little bit more of a leeway, of course it's not extremely fast, and it takes some time to look at where to go and decide if it's going in certain areas or not. But man, this thing is the first actual scare you'll get in the game, because you really don't have any items to get away. You'll be going through corridors, finding your way out of mazes, and finally finding the central unit in order to take it down, and your first actual EMMI takedown the proper way, meaning this time you'll have to melt the faceplate and then follow it up with an Omega Cannon laser in order to defeat it, which means you need to find a straightaway corridor in order to line up your shot perfectly at his face. The first robot Chozo soldier was probably my most deaths in the entire game. It's very unclear what you're supposed to do at first, and that's the point of Metroid, is learning. And I actually thought it was kind of fun after a long time of playing through these guys, because they appear multiple times throughout the game. Once you figure out their kind of pattern and how they move, it gets a lot easier. The thing that it comes down to is they have two different charges how they rush Samus. One is a red line, which means she cannot parry it, and one is a gold one, which means she can. And it's a split reaction that you have to do at the very last second. You kind of have to make up your mind exactly when you want to move and what you want to do right as the move is coming towards you, which can be very difficult, but also very exciting. They move all around the stage in all areas, and it's a very intense fight all the way through. The third EMMI you encounter is a very nice looking one. It's kind of like a lime tennis ball green. I kind of like it. Besides the point, it is a fun boss because it has the ability to go through corridors and hallways that you cannot enter until you obtain the morph ball. Obviously while destroying this enemy. So you have to destroy this enemy in order to obtain that morph ball ability, which means that it can go in many places that Samus cannot at the time being, meaning it will pop up out of nowhere. It will make shortcuts, it will come in out of, any spot that has a hole in the ground or in a hole in the wall, and it will appear all the time. And it is a true frightening experience to see how is this thing all the way across the room and somehow appearing in front of me. It's kind of bizarre, but it's also very spooky feeling, and it keeps you on edge the entire battle. The Chozo soldiers were a blast to fight. They all felt like actual warriors for the Chozo. The Malkin tribe are just very, very talented fighters with their spears, and they spin them around, twirl them around, and try to dash across the room and stab you from overhead. You can tell that they were very powerful warriors at one time, but as you'll find out soon enough, they're infected by X-parasites, which they then turn into monsters where they can spit goo at you. They can cause the goo to spew from their staff all over the room, and it's just they are a freaky creature, leaving you to have a parry contest at the end in order to parry him twice, grabbing his head and blasting him in his mouth to defeat him. Escue was a pretty big disappointment to me, and the reason why it's not lower is because all the other enemies and bosses in the game have better variants coming later on down the list. But Escue was really just an enemy that was brought into boss formation from a X-parasite. It's an enemy that you fought many times and all you did was counter it and kill it regularly within the main game. And the fact that there's no type of counter or parry moves within this boss fight or any cinematic or cutscenes or anything really special at all left this to kind of be forgotten. I didn't even remember this was a boss until I was looking up list of bosses for this game, and I was looking at my gameplay and was like, wow, yeah, all you did was shoot at it randomly and eventually it was destroyed, and you got to see a cool scene of the X-parasite capsule flying out like it did in Metroid Fusion, but for the most part, this is just a very underwhelming boss, and it was a very random, weird one for sure. Next up, we have the twin robot soldiers, which are the robot soldiers, but twins. These Chozo robot soldiers work the same way, and they work the same way the others did, but this time it's just a room of two of them, and you have to keep an eye on both of them as one is shooting charge shots at you, one's shooting different laser blasts, one's rushing you. It is very, very difficult for sure. In case you parry one, you have to work on the other instead of focusing on the down one, and it just gets all over the place. Eventually, you will get the multi-missile spread, allowing you to aim multiple missiles and kind of take them down a lot quicker, but it is just kind of annoying, but it's a lot of fun because it's very fast paced compared to the other bosses. You're constantly moving, never having a second to stand still. EMMI number 5 is probably the most annoying EMMI in the game, but also the most fun to fight because it freezes you as you run, and when it hits you with that freeze beam, you can't move for a solid 2 to 3 seconds, allowing the EMMI to catch up, as they're very fast in the first place, so this is very annoying, and they are always on your tail. Not to mention there's tons of water all over this place, and you don't have the gravity suit yet, which means you're running through the water very slowly as this EMMI is catching up to you, and it's just very, very stressful as you're slowly going through the water and watching it slowly catch up to you from behind. It is a terrifying boss fight for sure, and that ice beam that it has is just not fun until you get your own. Remember EMMI number 5? Well, EMMI number 6 has the same basic ability, but is even better. Yes, this EMMI has water full of his room until you get the gravity suit once again. It also has the ability to shoot through walls and stun you and chip damage away from you. It has pretty much everything that every other EMMI had put together, and it is crazy. Now, it's still not my favorite EMMI, and I'll tell you why in a bit, but this EMMI also has the most complex room for sure. In order to kill it, you have to keep going through this little tiny basic maze, and it's hard to get clear shots on him, which makes it very difficult. You have to break through blocks and go into morph ball mode real quick in order to escape him. There's lots of last split-second decisions that you have to make in order to get away, in order to line up a perfect shot on him. And finally, our last EMMI on the list, EMMI number 4, is just terrifying. And let me tell you why. You can shoot things at me all you want, you can freeze me in my tracks, you can put water in the rooms, but if you have a dash that's over 3 times faster than me, I am terrified. You can't just simply run away. You can't simply use your cloak. It will run into you. This one is smart as well. You can't get stuck anywhere. You can't find a dead end. You have to constantly keep opening your map to pause if you're getting stressed out in order to find a quicker path out. Its dash is extremely fast, and it will catch you over 1,000,000 times. It's a little exaggerated, but you get my point. It is definitely one of the most toughest enemies in the game, just because of how fast he is and how quick you have to react with your, reaction speed. And it just really tests your playing skills, and I love this. This is actually one of my favorite bosses in the game, and this was just a fun experience all the way around. As another enemy turned boss, I felt that Golzuna did something a lot better than what Escue did. Golzuna felt big and, scary. His presence was known and his attacks were mighty powerful. He sends out these blasts of little orbs that cover the screen, and you have to position yourself in a way to dodge its spread, which sometimes can be nearly impossible the way it's spread. And you have to be in like morph ball mode and I guess jump in the little square spaces that are present, which is very difficult. There's no real parry or animation at all, but it's really cool that you can still slide underneath them because you have to fight its other 2 evolutions prior, which is actually pretty cool that you get to keep defeating different versions of him until the final version awakens, which is actually a lot of fun. This boss was pretty cool. Getting to the back behind him was always a unique treat, and either sliding underneath him or jumping above him and dodging his powerful attacks was fun, and it definitely had its difficulty in this little tiny room that we had to share. Drogyga was at first very weird, and I didn't quite understand what we were supposed to do with this boss. As you didn't have any type of anti-gravity suit or anything to get around in the water good, this was hard to have fun with at first until realizing what I was supposed to do. Once you take out the tentacle at the top, you're able to grapple to the lever at the top, but only once you lower the water level with the button on the left. You'll have to hit both buttons on the left and right sides of the room, but only after hitting the button on the left can you ride the escalator type movement on the top. Because if you try with the water filled, it will move too slowly and Drogyga will wake up and hit you before you can make it to the other side, which is very interesting boss fight concepts, and I thought it was actually pretty cool once I figured it out, and dodging the tentacles weren't too bad once you figured out the pattern. There is a parry motive that you can hit, and it's just kind of, not as crazy and cinematic as the others. You kind of just go into a scene where you're shooting rockets at the center of it, but this was a pretty decent boss fight for sure. The elite Chozo soldiers were actually so much fun to fight. The earlier ones, all you had to do was blast away at their shields, and they allowed you to parry in order to break the shield, continuing on the fight. And then they developed a couple new moves thanks to the X-Parasites, but it's still the same fight with them with the spears, but this is just so much fun. The later one actually requires you to grapple beam it after you parry it, which is just even cooler, and this fight was just a lot of fun. It was raining, there was thunderstorms in the background, and this Chozo soldier is just so quick and fast on his feet. Of course, you have the parry sequence at the end, but this time Samus uses her new Metroid DNA arm in order to just suck in all of the energy from the Chozo soldier. With Samus having lost all of her abilities, and this being the very beginning of the game and the first boss fight of the game, this was a really good boss fight. This guy, Corpius, is just a crazy monster that has been teased throughout the beginning of the game. You'll see different silhouettes of him in the background, eating different environmental enemies, and all types of creepy appearances in the background as he runs into his hidey holes, but eventually you get to fight him face to face. And his gimmick is he can disappear, giving you the Phantom Cloak eventually. What you have to do is hit his little barb on his tail that glows when he disappears. And as you shoot that, he'll eventually reappear, and there's lots of different ways to attack him. You can simply just blast him in the face, but eventually you'll have to slide underneath him and follow that slide with a perfectly timed parry in order to continue attacking in a cool little animation where he'll grab you and you'll continue blasting him in the head, which just looks really cool. I love the cinematics of Metroid games, and this boss fight definitely had that. Yes, the beloved Kraid returns again in Metroid Dread, but this time he's chained up for some reason. I don't know, by the Chozo or whatever happened there, but he is pretty basic his first round. All you're doing is kind of blasting him in his face and shooting whatever he shoots out of his mouth back at him, and also destroying his claws that he fires at you, until eventually the platform Samus is on breaks, dropping her to the area below, and Kraid eventually getting free of some of his shackles, which then opens up an extreme boss fight. If you've ever played Super Metroid or Metroid Zero Mission where you had to fight Kraid before, you'll realize this is a great homage to those games, and it feels just like an HD classic boss fight. The attacks are almost identical. He still shoots spikes and throws those claws at you, and also shoots weird things out of his belly button that you have to destroy. Eventually, hitting him enough will allow you to raise to the top for a upward portion of his body battle, and once you're up there, you have the chance to parry one of his attacks, which then shows off an amazing cinematic cutscene. And the cinematic cutscene after you defeat him is just as good. It just flows so well, and this is just one of the most cinematic, most amazing looking boss fights I think Metroid has ever done in any of its games. Samus is an absolute threat here, and it's just so cool to see it. Not to mention, there is a way to cheese this boss. As one of the only 2 bosses in the game that you can do this, you can acquire the morph balls early, which allows you to open a hatch at the bottom left of the room, which allows you to blast into Kraid's belly button and set detonation charges on side of its stomach, which is just disgusting. But it is so cool that you can even do this and that the developers even allowed you to do this. This is just an amazing boss fight. Experiment number Z57 was actually briefly shown at the very beginning of the game being worked on, or some type of experiment being ran on top of him. And eventually we get to see him unfold as he corrupts the lava chamber and prevents the lava from flowing, making it freeze in multiple different sectors. Your job? To take this guy down, and he is an absolute beast. But this boss fight is just so much fun. There's lasers to dodge, there's tons of times to parry his attacks, and there's just giant claw swipes coming each and every way. This is a really, really fun boss battle. And once you get that parry, it's probably one of the best cinematic boss parries I've seen in many Metroid games. In fact, you get to ride him all the way around the lava chamber and just get thrown back into the battle. And of course, this boss battle is the second one in the game that actually has a trick in order to one-shot it. This trick isn't even a sequence break, instead it's just kind of a heads-up play that you can do. If you dash as the fans turn on, you can charge up Samus's super dash, which allows her to blast upward and one-shot him straight in the head, ending the battle instantly, which is just an amazingly cool thing to do, and when you pull it off, it just feels so good. Lots of the enemy's attacks remind me a lot of Raven Beak's laser attacks, which makes me believe that maybe he was the one experimenting on it and causing it to do all these crazy things to Samus, and that was his own intention. And of course, coming in our number 1 slot is Raven Beak, the final boss of the game. Raven Beak is just a super soldier, and the fact that he was one of the people that gave Samus all of these abilities just shows how strong he really is. He's had all these originally. He is the original power suit holder, and he can work his power suit, let me tell you. He has gravity balls, gravity manipulation, super lasers. He even swings his laser out of his arm cannon like it's a lightsaber. Like, the dude is absolutely insane, and he blast across the room. He can grab Samus, slam her against the wall, jump up in the air, slam on the ground, teleport, shoot giant massive bursts of energy through the air. I mean, what can this guy not do? Well, eventually win, because Samus eventually kicks his butt. You can counter almost all types of attacks. Dash attacks, if you dodge his giant blast, it'll go into a counter battle. There's just all types of cinematic scenes that happen, and it is a lot of fun. In Phase 2, he grows wings and even uses his arm cannon as a machine gun and flies back and forth throughout the screen, shooting massive lasers in mini bursts like, once again, a machine gun. He is a very difficult boss battle for sure your first couple of times, but once you figure out how to swoop around him and dodge all these machine gun shots, you should be okay. And in Phase 3, Samus blasts off one of his wings and he rips off the other like he's some type of freaky Sephiroth guy. But this man gets even more intense. He gets even more powers, but it's very similar to Phase 1 as he fights on the ground. He now has the ability to summon some type of sun thing that just absolutely shoots mega blasts, but if you use power bombs, it is no problem at all. Eventually, Samus's Metroid DNA kicks in and then she starts going insane, ripping off his mask and sucking her claws into the side of his beak and trying to suck him of his energy. It ends up bringing down the entire Sky Fortress as well, leading to a 1v1 battle with Super Metroid style Samus against the ex-corrupted Raven Beak, which is just one giant pink blast in order to blast him into smithereens. This was a great way to end the game, even though I wish I could fight the ex-corrupted Raven Beak a little bit longer and actually have a proper boss fight, but this was still a lot of fun. But thank you guys so much for tuning in, and thank you especially to those that made it to the end of the video. You guys are amazing. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe to stay up to date on all things Metroid and all things Nintendo in general. Thank you so much for tuning in, and like always, I'll see you all on the next one. See ya, guys.